All right, it looks like we are live. So we will just give our viewers a few moments to be able to see the notification and to join us here for today's broadcast. Apologize for the delay. There was some technical glitches, but we've found some solutions. So thank you everyone again for joining us for today's talk, which is part of our series of StARTers Live from the Siena Art Institute. And today's guest speaker is design researcher, Dr. Tom Bieling. So it's wonderful to have you with us here today, Tom. So as we give the viewers just a few moments to be able to join us for the live stream, let me just explain a little bit about this series of StARTers Live, which we began over a year ago, actually, at the start of the coronavirus pandemic with Italy's lockdown. So we've been going now for about a year, and it's really been a chance to reach out to expand our audience, to be able to also connect with people in our broader network of Siena Art Institute contacts, to be able to discuss creativity, art, and design in the face of the challenging circumstances that we are certainly all in the midst of still today. This month in particular, we've been focusing on the topics of accessibility and inclusion in art and design. And to briefly introduce today's speaker, Dr. Tom Bieling has been involved in EU project proposals with the Siena Art Institute, and I had the pleasure to meet you a few years ago back in Berlin. So Tom is currently a postdoc senior researcher and lecturer at the ZDF, the Center for Design Research at the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences up in Germany, and he's also had visiting professorships and lectureships worldwide. In his research, he mainly focuses on the social and political dimensions of design, particularly on aspects of inclusion and exclusion. He was the head of social design at the Design Research Lab of the Berlin University of the Arts from 2010 to 2019, and previously at the T-Labs UT Berlin. He's the chief editor at Designability's Design Research Journal, which he founded in 2008. And he's the co-editor of the book series Design Meanings. He's a founding member of the Design Research Network and is a regular member of juries, research, and expert committees, including the Scientific Advisory Board of the German Institute for Human Ethics and Science. And he's also the author of numerous other publications. He was elected the Young Innovator of the Year by the Falling Waters Consortium, and his work, which has received several awards, is exhibited worldwide. Some recent books include Design and Activism, published by Mimesis in 2019, as well as Gender in Design, which was published in 2020. So we're really happy to have some viewers now joining us for today's live stream. So we welcome you all to leave comments or questions, which we can see and then respond to at the end of today's broadcast. So now let's turn our attention to Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. And thanks for the kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. And thanks for having me. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks to the whole team at Siena Art Institute for your kind invitation to share my thoughts with you tonight, especially and mainly, first of all, on the topics of design and inclusion. And I guess now it's the moment to say next, please. To the audience, I will do this every couple of seconds because that was the best way for us to figure out how to actually share the screen, because it didn't work as we initially planned. So yeah, okay, so now next, please.
All right.
So over the past 15 years, I've been researching and teaching at several institutions. You mentioned some of them already, dealing with different topics and perspectives around the subjects of design, while the main question in my research, one of the guiding questions in my publications has always been what role design plays in a changing society. And from that point of view, the term design has long since been limited to the design of things. For example, chairs, books, posters, cars, tables, etc. But we're now talking about a rather superordinate concept of design that also includes ecological, economic, technological, political processes, or processes of social transformation. And these really have a strong relation to design, and they always have a strong impact on society. And this means that we're also dealing with a shift in areas of responsibility for design. And this, of course, goes hand in hand with a great opportunity to actually really become socially relevant, for example, by attempting to combat social injustice or to act in an ecologically sustainable way. While, on the other hand, a great responsibility for designers always becomes clear, since everything we do design can, of course, also have negative effects. And sometimes we cannot really anticipate these negative effects. So even if we might come up with a good intention, our solutions might have some very bad impact in certain ways. Horace Whittle calls that the so-called wicked problems. So we're not dealing with simple problems to be addressed with simple solutions, but we're dealing with complex problems, and coming up with a solution might cause completely new problems, and problems we might have never thought of before. Next, please. So for designers, it is quite necessary to deal with the question of what effects we have on our world with the things we design, especially in view of the fact that as designers, we do not only shape just the things that surround us, but we always shape very specific processes that are related to these things. Could be different processes, social processes, cultural processes, political processes, ecological, economic processes. In other words, we rarely design just a single artifact, but we always affect an entire ecosystem around it, and we have to be aware of that. Next, please. Which is obviously one of the key issues I'm dealing with in most of my projects, in which I've mainly been focusing on the social and political dimensions of design. And one of my guiding questions has been, next please, what role design plays in terms of letting people take part in our social processes, or in terms of not letting them take part. So it's about what role design plays in terms of including people or excluding them. So that's at least one of the central issues I'm dealing with in one of my recent books, Inklusion als Entwurf. Next slide, please. Translated to German, it would be Inclusion as Design. Because if we take a closer look at the technological developments around us, we can observe that as designers, we're permanently confronted with a dilemma that lies in the fact that in the course of technology development, especially in the course of digitalization, on the one hand, we have a high potential to enable people to participate in social processes. Next, please. And on the other hand, not least because technical development is progressing so fast, we always run the risk of actually creating a multitude of new problems, new difficulties, new barriers, new challenges with the things we design. Especially in the field of design, this dilemma becomes particularly evident because we are dealing with a field in which everything that is designed, everything that is developed, is usually oriented towards majorities of people, majorities of users. So if somebody gave us the task to design a bunch of new chairs for Siena Art Institute, we would most probably not come up with a chair that is 2 meters high or 10 centimeters above the floor, but we would probably come up with some kind of average norm-sized chairs, which is oriented in a sense that it should be comfortable for most of the people. And well, this is, on the one hand, it's okay to do it like that, but on the other hand, it can be a bit problematic. For instance, if we imagine a typical situation at the airport maybe, or at a train station, and a case that occurs very often. For example, a flight has been delayed, or a train arrives at another platform, and then the question, how do we manage to pass on this information to our passengers, an information which is quite important to just a few of them and totally unimportant to the rest? How and through which channels do we communicate this? The classical solution, we all know it. It's the good old speaker announcement, loudspeaker, or it's getting displayed on some kind of screen or blackboard, because the majority of people at the train station can hear. The majority of people at the airport can see. But what about the others? And here we already get an idea about the dilemma I was talking about. On the one hand, design tries to address as many people as possible. It tries to reach a majority of people, while at the same time, it excludes certain minorities even more. Next, please. Of course, a lot of effort has been made nowadays in terms of making existing technologies more accessible, but in my opinion, that doesn't go far enough. Next, please. In my research, I try to reverse this principle by taking the, let's say, extreme position as a starting point, by, for instance, asking, how should a car actually be designed if if none of us could use their hands? How should a smartphone, a building, a public square be designed if we assume that none of us can see or hear or walk or talk? Next, please. Oh, something happened with my presentation. Hold on a second. For some reason it stopped, so I have to start it again. So let me get back. And now I have to find you again. Where are you? Here. Okay. And what I have noticed is that this not only makes things more inclusive for certain user groups, but also more accessible for the general public. To come back to the example of the loudspeaker announcement at the airport, in this case, it's maybe not even only about a few deaf or blind people that might be running around at this airport at this very moment, but instead, let's think of people, for example, who are able to hear, but at that very moment they're engaged in a conversation, they might be distracted, probably they speak another language, a different language, etc. Next, please. So, something's wrong with the slides. I have to start it again. I hope that won't stay the whole presentation, but it keeps on deleting it. Yeah. No, that's it. Okay, let's try to open an old version, maybe. Let's try it with this one, maybe. Nope. Good old live session.
Yes.
Live recording is always the best. Okay, let's try with another version. Okay. Nope. That's a pity. So maybe I try this one. Okay, maybe. So where are we? I have to find you again. Here you are. Okay, it's the slide, disability slide. Okay. So if we think of terms like disability, for instance, I guess most of us have certain connotations with that term. And if we try to rethink it for a while by not reducing it to only bodily conditions, for example, a person with no arms or a person with a hearing impairment, but rather understand disability as part of a broader contextual framework. We should maybe not concentrate on whether someone has two arms or not, or whether someone can hear or see well, but rather pay attention to external aspects. First of all, our everyday environmental design. Next, please. So the question whether there are a couple of stairs at the entrance of your institute, which on an architectural level or on a design level would obviously be just a comparably small intervention, but it would be something which has a deep impact on the one hand on, let's say, how a wheelchair user might consider himself or herself to be a disabled person. And on the other hand, it also has an impact on how we, as the majority society, the social majority, actually see this person as a disabled one or not. So the bodily condition, like in this case, having no legs or being unable to walk, is actually not the main issue, but the crucial factor, or at least, let's say, as important as the bodily condition, would be the spatial condition, the architectural condition, the design condition. So design and disability are strongly linked to each other. They are deeply connected, which also means that the question of normal, the question of normality, who is normal, what is normal, which body is normal or not, ultimately is a design question too. And how we design things does have an impact on what we consider to be normal or out of norm. Next slide, please. For example, in terms of certain concepts of ideal beauty, we know a lot of these from design history or art history. Next, please. Or in terms of things that can be used by some people, but not by everyone, because they're not accessible to all of us. Next, please. Of course, this refers back to the question regarding the underlying concept of a design. When we design, what measurement, what scale, what criteria do we have in mind when we design? Do we think of certain people? What kind of people do we think of? The average person, the ideal user, the standard user, the norm user, and who or what would that supposed to be? And what happens to people who do not necessarily fit in this average grid, who do not fit in this ideal pattern? Won't they even be more excluded than before? Next, please. And the fascinating thing is, if such conceptions, the conceptions of what is normal and what is not, the conception of, let's say, what is right and what is wrong, if these things, when these things are constructed or co-constructed by design, it also means that vice versa, design can also be involved in, next slide, please, actually deconstructing these conceptions, which means in changing them, rethinking them, or critically challenging them. So design can also develop counter models. It can develop counter approaches. Next slide, please. So in the context of disability, for instance, we know there is always more than just one single design option. And we know that even for the user, it is not always easy to decide which one to choose. Do I rather want to prefer to hide? Do I rather prefer to hide a certain kind of impairment, or do I rather want to emphasize? A typical example would be glasses versus contact lenses. Both have the similar function, helping us to see a bit better, but they communicate different things to the outside world. And for both, it's pro and contra. There's always different reasons why to go for this version or the other one. Next, please. So here we begin to understand, as soon as I design for disabled people, immediately I design their disability too. And maybe another example you see on this slide here. I guess you're all familiar with this symbol shown on this example on the right side, the ISA, the International Symbol of Access. The thing here is, it is an icon meant to support, meant to relieve people with disabilities, but at the same time, it explicitly marks disabled people as the other. It marks disabled people as something special, something different, something strange, maybe. That means not only the barriers themselves, stairs at the entrance of a building, but also the spaces, the designs that are explicitly marked as barrier-free are not least involved in the social and the cultural construction of disability. Next, please. Now, as I said in my research, I tend to ask questions like, for example, to what extent the experiential knowledge of blind people or let's say deaf people could be made accessible for the general design of public places, buildings, or communication devices. Because to come back to the example of the ramp, such ramp, of course, is not only helpful for wheelchair users, but also for parents with baby strollers, suppliers with sack carts, skaters, bikers, etc. Next, please. So to come back to the aspect of changing perspectives, in one of my very early research, participatory research projects, in this case, together with the community of deaf people, we have been discovering several areas of communication. And one project was dealing with the very concrete aspect of deaf sign language. Next, please. The so-called, I'm not quite sure if it's the correct English translation, but in German it would be translated something as object referencing. Let me describe this term a bit quickly. In sign language, people can take certain words and position them in the three-dimensional space in front of them. Next slide, please. So let's say we're having a conversation. Oh, the video doesn't work. Okay, so imagine there was a video with a guy showing the gesture of a book. And he's taking this book and putting the book right in front of him. And then he's doing another sign for, let's say, a car, and he's putting the car on the left-hand side. So it's like a temporary agreement between conversation partners. And whenever we come back during our conversation to these words, we don't need to repeat them again and again, but we just point here or there, and all of us will know what we're talking about. So that's a very interesting concept that we, in our communication, like I'm talking about me as a non-deaf person. We don't have that in our ways of communication, and it's just one out of many examples how rich actually deaf communication is compared to the non-deaf communication. And we found many examples that could actually be transferred into the field of human-computer interaction, especially the field of gesture-based interfaces, thus addressing not only deaf people, but also others as well, even those that from a common definition might not have a disability. Next, please. So that's just one example out of many, which refers back to what I mentioned earlier, namely the aspect of the social impact, the social relevance of design. And I would like to show you another example from our research to make it a bit more graspable. Next, please. Especially since several groups of our society, mostly marginalized groups who could benefit significantly by certain products, by certain services or systems, they often lack the chance to actually operate these. And the main reason for that is that these groups aren't considered from the beginning of a process. They are, intentionally or not, they are being overlooked, forgotten, ignored, neglected. So possible solutions are not made for them, but for some kind of majority society in which the majority of people is considered to be the normal, and everything beyond, everything else, is being otherized. So we have some kind of strange construction of the normal and the other. So this can lead to a hierarchy situation, to inequity, inequality, and injustice in terms of some people gaining more power and some people less. So design plays an important role in terms of letting people take part in societal processes, or in terms of excluding people from these. Next slide, please. So now I hope the video works there. No, it doesn't. Oh, that's really sad, because that was one of the central videos you asked me for. So in a long-term project with several communities of deafblind people, we developed the so-called LORM glove, which is a communication device for deafblind people. So it's about people who can not see and cannot hear at the same time. And one common way of communication used by the deafblind is the so-called LORM alphabet, which is it's kind of like a tactile hand touch alphabet, in which the characters are assigned to certain areas of the hand. So it basically works by touching each other. So you go like A, E, I, O, U, L, M, N, F, S, C, H, etc. So it works by swiping, touching, etc. Of course, conversation partners have to be familiar with this alphabet, and physical contact is necessary. So it doesn't work over distance usually. You really have to be able to touch somebody in order to have a conversation. So what we came up with is this wearable communication device, which contains a lot of sensors, which enables the deafblind wearer to compose text messages in his or her own hand. The text then, the text information, the touch information then gets digitalized and can be translated into email, text message, voice message. So it can be sent to other devices, from one glove to another, from one glove to a smartphone, from a computer to a glove. So it can use different email channels, media channels, such as email or other media. It also allows to talk to more than one person at the same time. And it basically allows to to engage with a broader spectrum of people and gain access to a broader range of information. Next, please. Okay, now I'm next, please, because now I'm having a look at the old version. So it looks a bit different. Next, please. No, the first one, the one before, please. Yeah. So, which again brings me back to what I said in the beginning. As designers, we shape the world, and in that we also design social processes. And as design researchers, we can make these processes more visible, more graspable, more tangible. I talked about the matter of disability today, and now you can switch to the next slide. But it counts for a broad range of other topics, and maybe next time I'll talk about some other areas of research in which I've been focusing on topics such as gender, poverty, age, political activism, protest cultures, or intercultural dialogue. Thus, next slide, please. I'm very much looking forward to stay in touch with you. Next slide, please. And I am also looking forward to have a dialogue with you right now, maybe a conversation with you guys. Apologize for the technical issues, but thank you very much again. It's been a great pleasure to talking to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom. And thank you also for overcoming the technical difficulties to still be able to offer us a glimpse into some of your areas of research. And yes, it's really quite interesting to hear about how you're using design to rethink how we go about designing the spaces that we're in, the objects that we use, and who are these designed for, as you were saying. So there have been a lot of great comments that have come in from our viewers. For example, there was a question from Fotis, who's actually one of our current artists in residence, who is interested if you've done work with museums, for example, doing museum design, for example, if that happens to be an area that you've done research in.
Yeah, thank you. And hi, Fotis. Good to see you. Good to see your picture here. And of course, that's a very interesting issue, because museums are one of the most. It's a very important. Museums are very important institutions and areas of access. It's about passing information to the broad public. It's the general conception of museums is to open any kind of information, art, communication to everybody. And so for these institutions, it's even more important to be as inclusive as possible, as accessible as possible. And I know that, and I happily observed that over the past at least 10, 15 years, many institutions and museums and exhibition spaces have been working hard to be more accessible. And there's still a way to go. It's still a long journey, but a lot of effort has been made already. We can say, not for everyone, not for everybody. There's still, I mean, it's a difficult thing to be. I mean, accessibility it's a big challenge, not only for museums but for society, for politics, for all of us. But yes, museums are actually, at least I can talk about Germany or the German-speaking countries right now. Over the last 10, 15 years, museums have always been on the, I would almost say, at the forefront of fighting for accessibility. Definitely.
Yes, and in terms of other spaces, there was a question that came in from Jeff Shapiro, who is saying, the fascinating ideas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how design has the power to dictate people's behavior. You mentioned airports. Some airports intentionally position armrests to stop people from lying down on rows of seats. Other airports, especially in Germany, provide reclining pieces of furniture, allowing travelers to take naps between flights. So yeah. I think that's the idea of the airport being such an interesting area for research, both in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of sort of the attitude that we take in terms of how people are meant to use this space.
Yeah. That's a very important issue too. Thank you, Jeff, because especially, I mean, if we talk about airports, I mean, they're already private buildings or private kind of private public space, but you know, but mainly private, because you have somebody who owns the airport and you know who can deny access to people, and you can say like, hey, you're only allowed to come here if you booked a flight or something like that. But we see similar issues in many cities, unfortunately, denying access to people to stay and spend time in the public for whatever reason. Might be a reason because they don't have a home and they need to rest on a bench or somewhere in the public, or need to sleep somewhere. And with these armrest things, it's a very provocative and unsocial way to exclude people from public space. Now somebody is ringing at my door, but I hope they have a key. Yeah. Now I got lost.
No, it's fine. I think, as you were saying, it's a really fascinating space that's both private and public. The airport being an example also where the design really dictates people's behavior. So I think that's really, really quite fascinating. I was interested in the digital realm of design, since as we've been talking about physical spaces, but obviously currently we're in this virtual platform for the presentation. And I know that in your research, also in terms of design and activism, that's been something that you've been looking into in terms of how the digital realm has taken over more importance, especially this past year by necessity. But could you maybe say a bit about what you've uncovered regarding digital participation in terms of then the design aspects?
Yeah, that's. Well, that would be a discussion on so many
A whole
different
other
topics, of
talk,
course.
yes.
Yeah. But the development of digitalization over the last 30 years, maybe, let's say, like at least when the internet started, the World Wide Web, etc., participation became, on the one hand, much more possible, like in terms of direct communication, direct engagement, direct intervention, be it on different platforms such as social media platforms, but also in terms of getting in touch between like a customer and a company, or in terms of political participation, elections, etc., voting, be it in terms of collaborating, like collaborative work, like you mentioned it, like the last year has been a very difficult and challenging, but also very productive way for many of us, as we very fast adapted ourselves to the situation, and many of us found the opportunities, the chances to actually work across over distance, really long distance, and to collaboratively work together. So we could maybe see a shift here again, from, let's say, the technologies that started at a certain point to be interactive technologies, in which I interact with a system maybe, or with a machine, and now it tends to support us much more, again, to work together, like humans with humans, or also humans with non-humans, of course. But the work of the matter, or the notion of collaboration is very interesting here. On the one hand, because there's always two sides of a coin, because on the other hand, we again, it wicked problems, Horst Rittel. We found solutions for many things, but it causes a lot of other new challenges, of course, in our behavior, in terms of, I don't know, sustainability issues, in terms of so many different aspects. But I guess that will be a complete, not only a complete new lecture, but a whole semester, maybe.
Yes, there's so much to think about. And yes, I think also as we hopefully are in the future moving out of this necessary digital moment that we're finding ourselves in, to also think about that interface between real world experiences and the ongoing digital realm as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how that continues to evolve. But yes, we absolutely need to have you back, because I think there's so much more to talk about for also the art and activism, art and design and gender. So much that we could talk about, but probably in the interest of time, we should be wrapping up for now. But you've been so generous to be able to share with us a glimpse into your research. So thank you so much for leading this presentation today. And thank you also to our viewers for being able to join us today and for your questions and comments. I'll just remind our viewers that this series of StARTers Live will be continuing for the months of April and May. We will be focusing on the topic of art and education, sparking critical and creative thinking. So we hope you can join us this same time next week for this ongoing series. But thank you again so much for joining us today. So we'll see you next time. And thank you again, Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to Sienna. And next time, I hope we meet in real life again. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.